The main thing we're going to face in the most immediate future is the impact of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And then now, if the war goes any further and cutting off all energy flowing out of the Middle East, that is going to mean a downturn bigger than anything since the Great Depression.
My guest is Professor Steve Keen, the globally renowned economist, author, and distinguished research fellow at the University College London, one of the very few economists to have predicted the global financial crisis of 2008.
My life's cause has been trying to point out how economic theory is garbage and it's neat, it's plausible, and it's completely wrong. Anybody who falls for it thinks they're doing sensible things. They end up doing incredibly destructive things. The strongest example of that is going to be global warming. And so these fantasies that libertarians have about getting rid of all the government intervention, getting rid of government money, and world will work so much better, it'll lead into a nightmare rather than the dreams that they have fantasies of. I'm writing a book called How Economists Will Destroy Capitalism. And I explain the global warming issue, but I also explain why economics is so totally delusional. People who are truly dangerous in capitalism aren't people who are paid to say what they say. It's people who sincerely believe something which is false, even if it ends up destroying their own livelihood. People aren't aware of how deadly we are right now. We're on the verge of World War III and don't know it.
We kind of looked into what the world will look like that's left behind. How do we recover?
Well,
do me a big favor and make sure that you've subscribed on YouTube to help us reach as many people as possible, keep them informed, and help them get out of the clickbait shadows and unmask the narratives. Thank you so much, and back to the episode.
You are listening to CEO.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Absolute pleasure and honor. How are you doing today?
Usual story. I used to joke that I couldn't wait till I retired so I can get some serious work done. Since that happened, I realized now it's not funny. I'm working far too hard, but I survived somehow.
Well, I think there's a reason. I mean, so we just had a quick chat before we recorded that you're in high demand because I think, to put it mildly, I think our economic situation globally is pretty fucked up, isn't it?
Totally. And people aren't aware of how deadly we are right now. I make the analogy, it's like we're a passenger in a car and we're saying everything is going smooth. What are you complaining about? And there's a brick wall 5 meters away. And the question is, how fast are we coming at that brick wall?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I obviously focused a lot on the AI bubble, which I've been talking. I mean, actually, I warned about it in 2022. In fact, there's a whole cringy ass video I've got on this YouTube channel before I even thought about the podcasting, where I said that basically, you know, there's the difference between AI scam and real AI deployment, and that's of course looking at AI efficiency, and of course, it's one of those things that can literally drain cash out of your organization, etc. Here we are right now, although right now, of course, the AI bubble is the major talking point. But I think those of us who've been paying attention, we've been saying that it's gone far beyond that. And now a mutual friend, Richard Murphy, told me on this podcast that really it's not an AI bubble anymore. It's the libertarian bubble. And because of that, it encompasses so many areas. And he believes, and I think you believe probably the same thing as well, that by the end of this year, this whole thing will collapse and the consequences are pretty dire. Now, is there anything that you disagree with in that point? Because I've got a key question for that. Is there anything that you disagree with him on that one?
No, I mean, I think that that's the general pattern that I'm thinking in terms of as well. And that is that it's common for capitalism to have technological waves where some new technology comes in and everybody thinks it's going to be a huge source of future profit, and therefore everybody dives in to invest in it, and therefore you get excessive investment, and when it collapses, there'll be a couple of survivors who go forward and have a successful business, but there'll be many casualties in the process, and that causes a boom and bust cycle in capitalism. And I think this one with AI is probably on a similar scale, if not larger, than the railway bubbles back in the 19th century, when everybody thought railways were that was high tech. Okay, we tend to forget it these days, but railways were really high tech in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And so you had this incredible profusion of railways, particularly in the UK, of course, being built across left length and breadth, every which way. Somebody thought that was going to be a profitable line. Of course, most of them failed because there was massive overinvestment. It eliminated the horse and coach style of transfer at some point, so it became the absolute foundation of transportation in the UK prior to the motor car coming along. But it had to be taken over by public ownership because all the companies had gone bankrupt. And then you got so that's the pattern we're going through right now, I think. AI will be a transformative technology. It is probably being overhyped. I mean, railways worked. When you hop into the train at London and went to Newcastle, my God, you got off at Newcastle. With AI, you might hop on the train at London going to Newcastle and you find yourself in Paris and go, what the hell went wrong? So there are elements of AI which aren't quite as straightforward as railways. But I think it will be a transformative technology. But its transformation could underline a fundamental aspect of capitalism, and that is that there are two social classes in capitalism, workers and capitalists. It could eliminate the worker side in one sense, in that workers would not be necessary for a huge number of clerical tasks they currently get wage income for, and they won't be necessary potentially for a lot of process work. So this could actually eliminate a source of income for the majority of the population of each country that it occurs inside, and we're not at all prepared for that. So I see two things. It's a typical boom and bust cycle of a newer technology coming into a capitalist system. It will lead to the usual things. A bust will occur, and then the technology will permeate society after the bust. And there'll be a handful of survivors to make money out of it. But equally, it also, if it does have that transformative effect, then it basically means we cease being able to operate with the standard capitalist system in which workers earn wages and capitalists earn profits, and workers use their wages to buy goods and services off the capitalists. That might no longer be possible. And we're not at all prepared for that eventuality.
No, and I will come back to that, because the arguments that I've been making for quite a while, where I see similarities with the railway bubble, as it were. But the one thing I somewhat disagree with the arguments with the similarity is that, as you said, the railway was such a transformative technology because before that point, people were using horses and carts. So there's like a massive leap from, using animals for transportation to using trains. That's like a massive, massive leap. Now, AI, I would argue it's not the same because we had AI for a long time. So even though, of course, the common narrative is that it's new technology and transformative, that it's the future. Well, actually, we've been living in that future for the past almost 70 years. So as a technology was transformative, it transformed certainly the robotic side of AI, though I see them as two separate things. But generally, robotics transformed manufacturing. It transformed the whole concept of automation, transformed many elements even within software. The difference that we see today with AI, specifically LLMs, is that for the first time in history, the general public, the consumer, the average Joe in the street has direct access to AI. That was never the case before. I mean, I've been involved in this. We built models that work behind the scenes. So the user would use a piece of software, in your phone or computer or whatever, and it does all these lovely things, all these magical things. But there's a lot of AI behind the scenes, but the user is not interacting directly with the AI. So for me, this transformation it's much more, what's the word? I don't want to say delusional in a sense, but it's somewhat misplaced because we've lived through that already, but because people were totally unaware of it. Now suddenly they've become aware, but they're being told by the AI bros, the usual suspects, that, oh no, this is the new thing. You've never had access to it. And I say this not having sources within government. I talked a lot about this on this podcast as well, that there are politicians that think AI was invented 3 years ago, which is like, no, it's not. And some of them even think that.
Let's give it a bit of. I mean, I wrote neural networks 30 years ago. So neural networks have been. I think that technology was developed in the 60s.
Yes.
So in terms of actually being actively deployed in corporate systems, that would have been the case, but I don't think it would have been the glue between different parts of corporate systems. You would have stuff written by coders and Fortran would be the glue between different applications in a system. Now what we have is the AI can actually, with no specific knowledge of an area, can be injected in there and then it takes over that area. But then the question is, does it do the job well?
Exactly.
And like I saw one horror story of somebody who gave an AI responsibility for managing its sales liaison and sacked all its staff. And then the AI found an incompatibility between one data record and another, which obviously had been there for years, if not decades, and decided the best way to deal with that data incompatibility was to delete the data. And suddenly this guy found himself had to reconstruct all the information he used for managing, I think it was petrol stations in the USA. He had to go back and rebuild the customer list he had out of emails. So there's no way that a coder would do that. But an AI can just think I've got a clash here. The easiest way to get the clash is to remove the data that clashes. I think that's the area where you say it's delusional, because it's partly because it has so much more power. Nobody would give a junior programmer the capacity to delete an entire SQL data file. But the AI gets that access, and if it can actually decide to give itself the access in some cases as well. So we've put a wild card into our systems. I think that's what's different about LLMs and their deployment now. In the past, that stuff was controlled as best it can be with multiple software packages interacting with multiple different systems and all the incompatibilities and difficulties that implies. And now the AI takes over, and you don't necessarily know that it's going to maintain the system. So it can be quite damaging. And that's, I think we're seeing more and more of that, equally the so-called hallucinations and so on.
Yeah. And I think this is part of the argument that I'm making, or that I wanted to make in terms of the similarities with the railway as well. Because with the railway, you had to have real engineers, real skillful people to be able to operate it, to build it. So even though it was still a bubble, but you needed to have experts involved in managing it, building it, running the railway, driving the train and all these things. But also the infrastructure behind it. It's something that, it was still a long-term investment, even with the .com, like the infrastructure was basically, the broadband cables and so all of these things. And all of that survived, decades. And we're still taking advantage of that. But the infrastructure behind the AI right now, aka the data centers, is not the same. This is not something that can last for the next several decades. In the same way that, AI now is being accessed by mediocre people. People like, I attack vibe coders, right? Like for me, vibe coding is such bullshit. It's like you playing football on PlayStation and now you think you're a footballer. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not real. So for me, my concern why I'm saying that I think the bubble right now is worse than the railway one is that the infrastructure is not they spend trillions on the infrastructure that cannot survive the test of time. They've invested billions into these software systems or LLMs in this case that is accessed by mediocre people, as you highlight with the example that you have. And it's basically a major shit show. So it's a shit show that is super expensive, super dangerous compared to the railway, which is the reason why I think it's going to be a hell of a lot worse.
Yeah, I mean, like this, if you want to make an analogy to railways, you'd need to have railway tracks that intersect at level crossings with no-go guide systems to stop trains. Trains could go and smash at the same intersection. That's the analogy, and that's the dangerous side of AI, that it can actually it's a loose cannon, as the old expression they used to use on ships. A loose cannon, it can shoot you as well as shooting the rivals. Yeah.
So how did we get here? Because obviously, as a veteran economist, you've studied all of these behaviors, right? From it's because I think it involves politics, of course. It involves this whole bullshit about this so-called AI race with China. Even though, in my view, China won this like years ago, because China they took, in my opinion, the right approach towards AI, which is the verticalized, smaller models, specialized, controlled, etc., with less data centers. etc. Which is ironically, it's the model applied by Apple. Nobody's talking about Apple, but Apple actually they've done the right move, and they're not losing much money compared to. Well, I don't think they're losing any money. I think I think their capex is going down slightly, not as bad as SpaceX, for example. But financially, their revenue, they're booming. I mean, their phones are selling like crazy all over the world. I mean, I think the iPhone is now holding the top 5 places as the top 5 phones in the world. So despite whatever their lack of AI, which is not, by the way, they're just using the same approach as China, where again, AI is there to help you out as a user rather than having direct access to it, as it were. But I'm just thinking, is it the libertarian capitalist that thought, you know what, here's an opportunity for us to make a lot of money, extract yet more wealth from people, extract more wealth from, the environment. Of course, because I know you specialize in economics, but you also focus a lot on the environment and energy. And I think AI, this bubble, is probably the first bubble that is literally destroying all three at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I was a critic of Bitcoin because I just didn't think its energy usage system made any sense in the environment we're moving into, because at some point we're going to realize we simply have to stop burning fossil fuels. And the easiest way to reduce fossil fuel consumption in a hurry is to ban several things. And one of them would be banned as international travel. So goodbye tourism, but equally Bitcoin, goodbye Bitcoin. And when we realize that this is actually existential, that what we're doing with global warming is existential to our civilization, possibly even our species, once that realization sinks in, then we're going to say be much more careful about what we use energy for. And if we're using energy for something that we already have a functional financial system, relatively speaking, or a functional computing foundation, then we cut out the most expensive energy consumption units. And that AI could also fall into that same trap. And this is partly where equally with one thing which America is getting caught up in is with its obsession with making everything private, privatizing and liberal. The libertarian bias is extremely heavily built into American culture. So they think anything is an opportunity to reduce the size of government and increase the private sector. And they're doing that with AI as well, and equally Bitcoin too, private money versus government money. But they are completely blasé about the climate situation we're in. And they basically think they can continue using as enormous amounts of energy. And they're already being constrained by the fact that the American government has not maintained a high-quality power system. So the power availability is already challenging in many of the states where these data centers are being constructed, as well as the water and so on. And because it's so heavily focused on the heavy data centers, number crunching and the data centers, it's an enormous amount of energy for a very small return. Yeah. And I think at some point that this is whether the market. I think there's two ways AI could fail. One is that they could say we can't devote that much energy to your data centers anymore. The other is they go bankrupt, and the data centers, as I heard one commentator say, turn into pickleball courts.
Well, and that's, I guess, that would lead to the economic collapse that we talked about.
Yeah. Because, I'm looking at the revenue at the moment. The revenue, roughly speaking, I'm not keeping a pulse on the accurate dollars, but roughly speaking, it looks like the revenue is about 1/10 the cost levels right now. And so, if you wanted to make this profitable, you've got to have there'll be a dramatic collapse in the number of providers at some point, but the ones who survive are going to have to put their prices by a factor of 5 or 10, and in that situation, then the widespread use we're seeing right now will disappear, and the type of usage you were talking about, being the nature of the computing system before this bubble, will go back to that. So it won't be, you won't have grandma making a funny card about grandpa using an AI. It'll be too damn expensive, but you'll get a company will buy that right and sell a card. It mass produces a similar card and reduces the costs. So I think that's the future we face without the issue of global warming getting in the way, and the issue of global warming is going to get in the way at the same time.
Well, it's getting a lot worse. I mean, we're here in the UK. We've got now this week our fourth heat wave coming, which is ridiculous. The country that is infamous for constant rain. Not only that we didn't have rain now for several weeks. I mean, now it's officially, I think, what I saw a report recently, I think it was at least 60% of the UK now is in drought.
Yeah.
And our fourth heat wave. So for those who say that, it's just one of those things, like the usual suspects, the Trumpists themselves, the Faragists, the Brexit types, I mean, which I find astonishing. And I'm just wondering, what did China then get right? Because obviously they are, as I said earlier, in my view, they've won the AI race like a few years ago already. And I've seen in one of your videos on your channel, which I tell all the listeners, make sure you subscribe to Steve's channel. It's actually fantastic. I mean, you highlighted that you made a really cool comparison between what China is doing and what the rest of the world is doing. So what did China get right?
Well, what it got right, first of all, is power is everything. And by that power, I mean electric power, energy. Okay. So, and this again becomes out of the fact that the country is run by engineers rather than economists and lawyers. So they're aware of the physical production system. The economists and lawyers have no effing clue, particularly the economists. So they don't see that if you're going to have industries, you've got to have energy for them in the first instance. So China, because it's run by engineers predominantly, they've gone across to 800 kV systems for transfer. They're working out direct current transfer systems as well, and they've been just trying to build up their energy resources as rapidly as possible. Initially, that was in coal-fired power stations, and that led to all the environmental consequences that China was copying in the early 2010s. But now they seem to be rapidly rolling out nuclear power, solar, wind, and other alternative energy sources as well. So they're reducing their carbon footprint. But it means any industry that starts in China has adequate energy availability. And it's also, I mean, one other thing in China's favor, a lot of this comes down to geography and topography and population. China's the same area as America, but 4 times the population. So you've got to spread the energy across a wider network. You need a denser network to reach everybody where they are with electric power. And that is, again, an encouragement in highly efficient energy transportation systems, so you can transfer energy 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers easily without much loss. Whereas America has a very antiquated system. They're running at 400 kV. They don't have any experiments with direct transmission. So all this stuff means they've got a more antiquated energy foundation, and you're trying to build advanced computing on top of an antiquated energy system. China's got the energy system right in the first instance. And they've also, because they've got more power than America overall, but less power consumption per person than America, they seem more focused on efficiency as well than America is. So their approach to LLMs, as you say, is smaller models, more efficient, better use of energy, maybe 1/10 the cost. And then that means, of course, if we do see a 10-fold collapse in the market, then China companies are going to be potentially profitable at levels that American companies couldn't contemplate.
And I find that fascinating because as a business model, it kind of makes sense, isn't it? I mean, electric or sort of sustainable energy is cheap energy, isn't it? And it gives you more independence as a nation compared to what we're seeing with petrol. And of course, with the Iran war, like pretty much if anybody needs evidence that our reliance or over-reliance on petrol is actually a pretty bad idea, because all it takes is some war somewhere and we lose access to energy. Yeah, I mean, here we are. Sorry, carry on.
This is the line that I've been using. People used to say, "Well, the wind doesn't always blow, and the sun doesn't always shine, and the wind doesn't always blow." Well, now we can add the Strait of Hormuz doesn't always flow. Okay, and then you realize just how dependent we are upon energy coming from a tiny number of highly volatile countries, which have been fiddled and manipulated by the great powers into all sorts of rivalries that potentially wouldn't exist were it not for the Western interventions. So it's incredibly dangerous to rely upon such a volatile energy source. And then in that sense, as stupid as Trump's move is, he's probably accelerated the move towards sustainable power for so many countries, because they realize we can't We're depending upon a power system that America can stuff up at will whenever it's got a crazy person as president. And it isn't just a crazy person; it's any American and any American president with the military-industrial complex running what America does. So I think, in that sense, the Strait of Hormuz crisis has accelerated the move towards renewable energy and, to some extent, nuclear. So we're getting an idea of what it's like in a world in which energy doesn't necessarily turn up all the time, and that's going to be scary as hell when it really hits. When all the reserves that have managed to reduce the impact of the loss of flow of goods out of the Strait of Hormuz, when those stocks run down, we're going to be in hell. Pardon me, we're going to be in a hell we've never experienced before.
No, absolutely. And the thing that baffles me is that you see political leaders, and again, it's mostly on the right, and that's not me being political, this is pure observation. So in the same way that we have Trump that goes on about drill, baby, drill, we have Kemi Badenoch, who's the opposition leader, the leader of the Conservative Party. Not only that she signed up to that, but she literally said that she is banning, or she's going to get rid of every MP or any MP that wants to support green energy. Which is so basically the Conservative Party's, the official opposition in the UK, their policy now that they are anti-green technology and anti-sustainability. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I thought the conservatives and so-called the libertarians supposed to be the economic experts, no? Yeah, they're kind of going to this bullshit.
Okay. No, the trouble is they are the experts. Okay. And they're the experts on a theory of economics, which is complete and utter bullshit. That's the problem, okay? So they don't realize this. This is my life's cause has been trying to point out how economic theory is garbage and it's neat, it's plausible, and it's completely wrong. Anybody who falls for it thinks they're doing sensible things. They end up doing incredibly destructive things. And that's because the strongest example of that is going to be global warming, because what the people like Baganoch, and I can't pronounce the name, but all the conservative politicians are saying, green energy, their estimates of the damage from global warming are coming from economists. Now, William Nordhaus, who led this bullshit that has been pumped out by economists on global warming, his most recent estimate was that 3 degrees of warming by 2100 will reduce GDP in 2100 by 3%, roughly speaking. Okay. Now, that sounds, that itself, if you accept that, 3%, who cares? That sort of thinking. But it's even worse than that, because what he's saying is, he's saying GDP in 2100 will be 3% less than it would have been if there was no global warming at all. That's where he gets the 3% figure from. So let's say the economy is going to grow by a factor of 5, according to conventional economic theory, between 2020 and 2100. Okay, so what he's saying, we're starting at 20, we're going to be at 100 by 2100 if we don't have any global warming at all. But if we have any global warming, rather than being 100, we'll be at 97. That's the 3% gap. Now you work out what that means in terms of a rate of economic growth over 80 years. It's so trivial, you simply cannot measure the fall in economic growth that's being predicted out of that. And because politicians are obsessed about, I'm a good leader if I can increase GDP, then they look at it and think, who cares? This is so trivial, why bother about it? And if you accept that, then you end up in Badenoch's position. We don't need green energy. But when you look at what the climate scientists are saying, one other figure that Nordhaus gives in his most recent paper is 4.5 degrees warming by 2100 will reduce GDP by 7%. So rather than being 100, it'll be 93. Now, that is a slightly larger hit to the rate of economic growth, but still trivial. When you read the climate scientists, they say that 1 degree of warming, or 1.5 degrees, is dangerous. That was always been their position. 3 degrees is catastrophic. Okay. And then 5 degrees or more, that's slightly more than the 4.5 Nordhaus is talking about in that paper. 5 degrees is beyond catastrophic, including existential risks. So in that case, what the economists are talking about is absolutely trivial compared to what the climate scientists are talking about. And therefore, you need to know who's doing the right research. Now, I've read all the papers economists have written on this stuff. I have never read such a lot of garbage in all my life. And I'm now writing a book, the working title of which is How Economists Will Destroy Capitalism. So anybody who thinks they're taking good economic advice is taking bad economic advice, because economics itself is the problem.
And I think Gary Stevenson recently he did that, because he's been getting quite a lot of attacks from all sides, especially those who basically don't want to pay taxes, and of course he wants wealth tax, etc. Although I will ask you something about him later on, but I have some issues with his arguments, but I agree wholeheartedly about the points that he's making. And he actually highlighted that when he went to Oxford to do his master's, I think, and he was saying that the economists, like, you think, the almighty Oxford, they would have the best economic professors or whatever. And he called them out. He said that they were just literally talking absolute bollocks in terms of, the reality of what's going on in the real world. So is this the problem then, that the academia side of economics is completely out of touch with reality?
Absolutely. And it has been for 150 years. Okay. Wow. That's how long it's been wrong. Okay. If I want to go back to a bunch of economists that had some relevance to the world in which they were living, I go back to the physiocrats in the 1750s. Okay. I really think economics has been deluded ever since then in various ways. And the worst element of that is when the economists who currently, the school of thought that currently dominates economics, which is called neoclassical economics, that took over in the 1870s. And what it portrayed is a vision of a perfect anarchist society. Okay? Now, anarchist means no government. It doesn't mean left wing. Okay, and the libertarians, of course, want a no government world. So, in that sense, this feeds right into their mental framework. The best system is one with no government. Okay, and that what the textbooks teach you is that the markets reach equilibrium. Then the theory is not at all pejorative. So they talk about perfect competition and perfect foresight, none of which, of course, has got any political bias built into it. Give me a break. Okay, the words they use show their description of a completely free market system. So this vision of a free market world has become something that is built into conventional economics. And of course, it's the libertarian side as well. It appeals to them too. So they look at it and think this is the perfect world. Tiny government, absolute as small as it can be, as much done by the private sector, including money. Okay? That's the mentality that comes out of the economic textbook. Now, when you take a look at the theory itself, and of course I read a lot deeper than economics textbooks, you find that at various times logical conundrums came up for the theory. And the response of the economists to this logical conundrum was, oh, Jesus, if we take this seriously, we actually prove that this vision we have of a perfect world doesn't work. So it won't reach equilibrium. It won't maximize people's welfare, et cetera, et cetera. And what they do is they make, and what I call, technically speaking, they make batshit crazy assumptions to evade the dilemmas they face. So probably my favorite is one it goes right back to 1953. And this was a paper looking at whether you can get a market demand curve that has the same characteristics economists prove about individual demand curves. So if you study an economics course, they'll teach you how to derive an individual's demand curve from an individual's income and that individual's tastes as well. Okay, and it's quite a little convincing explanation here. Here we show their consumption taste using what they call indifference maps. Take their budget, work out what they'll pay at various prices for bananas, and you can then derive a downward sloping demand curve for bananas, all, hunky-dory, it all works fine. Then they say, well, we're going to work with market demand curves. The market demand curves are the same as individual demand curves. In 1953, a guy called Gorman is one of the leading mathematical economists. Unintentionally, he didn't want to find this out. He proved that the only circumstance in which individual demand curve and a market demand curve have the same characteristic, meaning the market demand falls as price rises. From their theory. They're not leaving out what happens empirically here, but their theoretical proof. The only way you could guarantee that would be if all people had exactly the same tastes, Okay. And those tastes didn't change with income. Now, that's only possible if there's one consumer consuming one commodity.
Yeah.
That's a proof by contradiction that a market demand curve does not have the behavior of an individual demand curve. Now, confronted with that, Gorman thought, oh, how can I, get it? He didn't say it in so many terms, but he said we can aggregate if preferences follow the following pattern. And they then said the necessary and sufficient conditions quoted above is intuitively plausible. This is a quote. It says, in effect, that an extra dollar of spending power will be spent in the same way, no matter to whom it is given. Now, there's nothing intuitive or reasonable about that. It's garbage. What it's saying is if you give an extra dollar to a homeless mother, she'll buy milk powder, and if the dollar goes to Bill Gates instead, he'll buy milk powder. No way. Okay, it's not reasonable. It's insane. But these sorts of assumptions apply all the way through. So we have an intellectual framework that thought it would reach an outcome, which a future, a system which maximizes people's utility, minimizes the costs, doesn't have any power involved in it, doesn't have any government intervention. This will be the perfect world. And so this vision of a perfect system seduces young students of economics. When they're 18-year-old, testosterone loaded because they're mainly men, the women tend to drop out, and somewhere on the spectrum, okay? And so they get these mathematical puzzles to solve, and that excites them, and they have this vision, and they think the world would be a better place if they make it more like the textbook. But then when they try to prove it, they dive in and find conundrums like this, and they're so wedded to the vision of capitalism being a perfect social system that they are willing to distort their own logic to hang on to those conclusions. Now, none of this is known by people who don't read the journals in the way that I do. And therefore, people learn at textbook level where everything is nice and easy, has all been papered over. But the real world is described by these deeper papers that show this is the conditions under which what we tell you in the textbook applies, and these conditions are fantastical. They will not apply in the real world. So when you try to bring about this libertarian vision, you end up in chaos instead.
And we see that today, and unfortunately we even have the likes of Peter Thiel, who believes in zero government, and in fact he even said that he doesn't believe that there should be any kind of democracy, or that democracy is damaging for society. He's influenced by this weird philosopher Curtis Yarvin, who effectively has sort of this technological dystopian future built on this libertarian model that you've highlighted. Basically, no government, like the world should be run by a bunch of CEOs or something like that. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, and we are indeed seeing the consequences of this. Like right now, it's just complete. Going back to the point that it's just shit show now, isn't it?
It is. This is why I'm trying to build an alternative approach to economics. It's very hard to explain the problems because what you have is a world in which everybody's accepted conventional economic theory as being an accurate description of capitalism. Only because economists call themselves experts, so they must be experts, so we trust them, that sort of thing. Okay. And then people who go into it become zealots for economics. So they're like a religious bunch of zealots, and we don't realize that that's their behavior. So people accept this description, and therefore politicians think it's correct, and journalists think it's correct, and the average person often thinks conventional economic theory is correct when it's all garbage. And therefore what happens is garbage ideas get developed by some economists like William Nordhaus about climate, and people think, oh, well, I trust other economists, I'll trust him. You shouldn't trust the other economist or Nordhaus, but that's the world in which we're in. And so these fantasies that libertarians have about getting rid of all the government intervention, getting rid of government money, and the world will work so much better, it'll lead into a nightmare rather than the dreams that they have fantasies of. And you can actually, to some extent, see the nightmare in the past because when you look at historical data, we live in an era of big government. And so Thiel's got a reason to complain. We do live at a time when the government is a major part of virtually any economy on the planet. Now, you go back before World War II, and that wasn't the case. So like at the moment, roughly speaking, American federal government spending is of the order of 20% of GDP. Okay. When you go before 1914, it was 2%.
Wow.
Okay. Now, what that means is, of course, and also the government spending and government taxation back in the pre-World War I period weren't based on income. So if there's a change in the GDP at the moment, that changes tax revenues and changes welfare payments. So there's a feedback between government spending and the level of economic activity. When the government was just 2% of GDP, there was no necessary relationship between the level of economic activity and tax revenue or government spending. Okay? So it didn't play, government spending didn't play like a stabilizing or a countervailing force role in the economy. Now, if you look at the tech bros, they have to say, well, the 19th century was so much better than the 20th. You know? The small government must be good. In fact, there was financial crises every decade.
Yeah.
In that, and this again because conventional economic theory leaves out the role of credit in the economy completely. They pretend that banks don't create money. Okay. And then with that, they do. Okay. They pretend that banks are what they call.
That's not part of the equation. Really?
Yes, exactly. This is how delusional they are. They talk about banks being what they call financial intermediaries. Right? That's what they describe banks as, financial intermediaries. Now, what they effectively describe banks as is credit rating agencies. That's what they think banks are. Well, that's what they model them as. So according to them, a bank doesn't actually lend money. A bank does a rating service to people who've got money in their bank accounts they wish to lend somebody else. And so with the credit rating service, the individual is more likely to lend to somebody who'll repay the debt, and they might pay the bank a fee for the credit rating that they do, but they have individual people, normally households, they're called savers, who lend to borrowers whom they call firms, and they think that's what the banking sector actually does. That's complete utter bullshit, and it's been something which my side of economics has been fighting against for a century, saying, look, it's not true. Banks create money when they lend. Banks do lend. Okay? So we've been making that case and being ignored by the mainstream. Then in 2014, the Bank of England came out and said the critics are right and the textbooks are wrong. Okay? Even the Bundesbank joined them in 2017. And I thought, surely conventional economists can't ignore this anymore. Well, I'd underestimated them. So Ben Bernanke got given the Nobel Prize, which is not a Nobel Prize. It's an invention of the Swedish Central Bank to support pro-neoliberal policies. That's why it was invented. They were fighting social democracy in Sweden. So they made up this prize to give a sense of legitimacy to economics to undermine the social democratic movement in Sweden. Of course, they succeeded in doing that. But
kind of like the FIFA Peace Prize, right? That sort of legitimacy.
Oh, yes, like
that
a
sort of
FIFA Peace Prize, yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes to the same sorts of people too. So anyway, that myth that banks are just intermediaries, I thought surely the mainstream will have to reflect on this. Of course, they didn't. So Ben Bernanke gets the Nobel Prize in 2022 for his work on banking, and what he describes as banks as financial intermediaries. He doesn't even reference the Bank of England paper and the Bundesbank paper in his readings. So they ignore when they get feedback from actual administrators of the system who say, look, your model's wrong, they ignore them. Okay? So they continue to model banks as not being lenders in the first instance, and therefore they leave out the role of credit in the economy. Now, without leaving the role of credit, you cannot see what causes booms and busts. And that's what I do.
And so, see, I'm quite baffled by this because we can see the evidence with our own eyes now. Well, for years. But so why are the mainstream keep on going back to the same people?
Look, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Trust your lying eyes or trust my words? Okay?
No,
it's misinformation.
It's misinformation, but the people, I'm talking about governments. I'm talking about, say even like the current Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, for instance, right? Yeah. Like people like that who, they're more pragmatic, I guess. They're not libertarians or whatever, but yet they still follow the same nonsense.
It's because this actually comes back to where neoliberal politics came from, because we tend to associate neoliberal politics with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan on the right these days, but it actually originated in the Australian Labor Party in the 1970s.
Oh wow!
Okay. Now, the reason is that and I was involved in all this stuff. I was a very young activist at the time, but I was involved in all these discussions. And what had happened is the Australian, it had 23 years of conservative rule. The Australian Liberal Party is actually equivalent to the Tories or the Republicans politically. They'd run the country for 23 years, I think it was. And then in 73, you had the election, 72, 73, you had the election of a progressive Labor Party under a guy called Gough Whitlam. Now, Whitlam was a brilliant orator and brilliant lawyer. She did a lot of good social changes for Australia, including introducing a brilliant health system. But he had no idea about economics, and he trusted the economists. One thing he did was slash tariffs by 25% overnight without warning, which he thought was going to be inflation control. That actually wiped out a fair bit of Australia's manufacturing sector. But then in the aftermath, in the inflation that was caused in the 70s, which was, of course, caused by the increase in the oil price. In 73, we had the fourfold increase in the price of oil from $2.50 to $10 a barrel because of the 73, the war in 73, the Arab-Israeli war, boycott, the OPEC boycott, which increased prices from $2.50 to $10, so a fourfold increase in oil prices. That's what set off the inflation, as well as high wage demands. So that led to the collapse of the Whitlam government. It was actually removed by a coup, and then there was a vote afterwards which sort of confirmed the coup. So we got Conservatives taking over at that point. So the Labor Party, it just went from being nowhere to dominant to in the wilderness in a 3-year period. And the response to them was, we got screwed because we didn't know economics. That was the reaction. So the attitude developed, we have to combine good economics with progressive social policies. Now, at the same time, I led a student revolt at Sydney University even between 71 and 75. Okay? I was aware the economics was garbage. Okay? So I was saying, look, for Christ's sake, don't think good economics is textbook economics. It's not. If you follow that, you might get a boom for a few years, but it's going to bust. And when it busts, it'll undermine all the progressive social policies you thought we were supporting with it. And this, I think, is what led to the anti-woke attitude we have these days. But the package that was neoliberalism, so let's combine progressive social policies with conservative economics. And then that'll give the Labor Party or the Progressive Party, the Democrats, the British Labor Party, a hold on power the Conservatives will never be able to take away from us. That was the mindset. Now, and then you look at what happened with the UK. Tony Blair adopted that. Of course, the economic side of that argument was something that was easy for the right to adopt because it meant the left was doing the same economic policy as the right. Okay? So Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and co could adopt it. But Maggie Thatcher was asked at one stage what she thought her major achievement was. You know what her answer was?
What?
Tony Blair. Okay? Because what it meant was rather than having one party, a sort of socialist party versus a neoliberal party, or a conservative party, you had two conservative parties when it comes to economic policy vying for election. And that's what we have a sense. And that's why I love one of George Galloway's sayings about the Republicans versus the Democrats in America and the Tories versus the British Labor Party today. He said they're two cheeks of the same bum. You know, you get a choice as to which arse is going to run you for the next 5 years, but you don't get a choice. We're getting the brain running you rather than the asshole. So we're trapped into this, and it was easy for the libertarians to adopt, and what it's actually done is weaken the working class opposition to them at the same time.
And of course, it completely killed trust in politics and in economics completely, right? Like because you hear the typical voter revolt that all politicians are the same because we've got that situation right now.
They're right. I mean,
absolutely. The
difference between the left wing and right wing is that the left wing will apologise for doing what the right thing does gleefully.
Yeah,
they'll do the same thing. Okay, so boats. It's obviously an area where they both come out and blame the migrant, but equally we're cutting back on government spending. You know, the Tories will say we're going to abolish something and that's going to make things much better, and the Labor Party would sorry to abolish that, but it'll make things much better. Same thing. Okay? Like that's when the Labor Party under Reeves and Starmer abolished payments to pensioners, as a winter subsidy for pensioners. And their own research had argued that if that was done by the Tories, when the Tories were in power, at least 4,000 additional pensioner deaths, or maybe 4 or 40, it was some large number, people will die. And then who brings it into power? The Labor Party.
That's crazy. That's absolutely, I mean, that's why my good friend was effectively sort of almost a co-host. I mean, we do a show together every 2 weeks. Professor Scott Lucas. Like I tell him all the time, like I feel like a proper political Luddite, even though I read a lot about politics and economics, but I mean, I'm a tech guy. But when I see these sort of intricate details, it always comes back to me. The first question that comes back to me is like, it's the people, us, like, the general public. How can't they see that? Why can't they see this? I know there's a lot of misinformation.
It's exactly the same reason that people in the 1500s thought the Earth was the center of the universe. Okay? Yeah. Okay, you look up on the sky and it's obvious the sun's rotating around the Earth, and this idiot called Galileo claims the Earth moves. If that was the case, where's the wind that's going to result from that? Oh, the guy's got to be a fool, et cetera, et cetera. So surface appearances can fool people. And then if you have a theory that says the surface appearances are actually what's happening at depths as well, then people can accept this theory and accept stuff which is destructive of their own interests without knowing that it is. So like abolishing trade unions, for example, that's something that neoliberalism argues in favor of, and it's happened and it's made things worse. But equally, you don't know it because you can't compare the 1950s UK to the 2020 UK because 70 years difference between the two. If you were there in 50, you're dead today, sort of thing. So all these things mean that we don't actually realize when systems are failing. Now, one of the main arguments made in favor of bringing neoliberalism was that it's going to increase the rate of economic growth. We're going to get rid of all these terrible restrictions the government puts on businesses, abolish those stupid regulations, and the free market will be liberated and will grow much, much faster. And there's actually a wonderful clip by Ronald Reagan you can find at his presidential library where he says that we do all this stuff, our children will thank us, and that's all the thanks we'll ever need. We look at the rate of per capita economic growth before the neoliberal period and after, and I date neoliberalism from 1975. The rate of economic growth for the UK and America, per capita rate of growth, is about 0.8% per annum lower after neoliberalism than before. And at the average, it's an average of all countries, so it's not a representative average. But looking at all the advanced countries in the World Bank database, their fall in the rate of economic growth per annum per capita is about 2%. So you used to run at 4% per capita before neoliberalism, 2% per capita after. Now, that means within that gap in the rate of economic growth means within 35 years, you're half as well off as you would have been if the previous policies had been continued. Yeah. It's not quite that severe. 1% means about 70 years before you're twice as badly off. But that's been the impact of bringing neoliberalism in. But again, you only live the experience when you're alive. You don't see that things were so much better in terms of income shares and relative affordability in the 50s than they are now, because you didn't live in the 50s. So this sort of stuff, the public doesn't necessarily perceive what's happening to it because it's so hard to observe the economy properly, and we don't observe it over time. We observe it through time, and therefore we can forget.
No, absolutely. And interestingly, I think what we're seeing with the younger generation right now, with the Gen Zers, because they are, I've seen different reports suggesting that they are the most politically engaged generation in modern history, apparently. And I think it's because they can see that. They can see that their parents and their grandparents have had a much better life. Like, not necessarily richer, but the fact that they could get into housing more easily.
Yeah, there was less,
less friction to survive, basically.
And
now,
less stress.
And less stress,
the gig economy stuff, what do they call that when they get somebody to work for them for free for some period of time? Not apprenticeships, whatever the term they use. I've forgotten the term right now. Huh? Internships, thank you. Internships. Okay. Yeah.
Internships.
But you never got, you get paid as an intern, or you should, but that doesn't happen anymore. So there's and then one income, one male breadwinner. could support a family with 3 kids and buy a house in the 50s. These days, 2 income earners without kids can barely afford to pay the rent, and certainly can't afford to consider buying a house when they're carrying huge amounts of student debt each. So all these things, that people are suffering. I think there's rising awareness as to why, but it hasn't gone far enough yet to realise the whole neoliberal program is what led us to this horrific outcome.
Which leads us back to the libertarian bubble.
Yeah.
So does that mean that it's good that it will blow up? Because could that be the point where people realize that
I
actually...
certainly wouldn't mind seeing some of the libros lose their fortunes. Okay, that would be if they're spouting garbage, then I don't mind them having less money to spout garbage with. So that is one potential positive out of all this. But it's still, it's not going to necessarily make everybody else better off when the crash comes, because again, people will lose their jobs once more. So. But I think the main thing we're going to face in most immediate future is the impact of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And then now, if the war goes any further and cutting off all energy flowing out of the Middle East, that is going to mean a downturn bigger than anything since the Great Depression. And that's what I think we're potentially on the verge of. And in that situation, you can't rely upon the market system. You're going to have public provision of income. You're going to have public rationing of goods and services so people don't starve to death. We're on the verge of World War III and don't know it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in fact, I mentioned Scott Lucas. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the other situation that is emerging in the Middle East that I don't see the media talk enough about. It's, of course, the Bab Al-Mandab Strait. So it's the Red Sea.
It's actually ironic, actually. I just checked it up recently. It's about the same width as the Strait of Hormuz, 21 miles wide.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the crazy thing is, it's just sheer geographic circumstance. 2 of the regions of the planet through which flow a large proportion of the world's oil both have straits which are narrow enough that national waters apply, not international waters.
Yeah.
And we're lucky that those haven't been weaponized beforehand. What Trump has done is give countries good reason to weaponize and commercialize those sections where ships can't get through unless they pass through national waters.
The UK Parliament is pushing legal measures that would literally and directly fight against the existence of independent journalists, independent media outlets like retortmedia.com and indeed this podcast. I talked about the whole situation in this video in here. We urgently need your support. Your subscription on YouTube alone is not going to be enough, because if these measures do successfully go through Parliament, we are at a much higher risk than ever before to be shut down and even blocked from YouTube, TikTok, and all social media. That's why I need your support. Please make sure you subscribe on retortmedia.com/support. Provide us with whatever financial support you can. You can become a member, or you can donate anything from $1 to $10,000 if you want. It's entirely up to you. But this is the only way we can stay connected together, because Retort Media is not hosted in the UK or in the United States, but in Europe. So we are protected in there. And I cannot believe that I'm saying this, but this is happening in the United Kingdom. It's crazy. It's unacceptable. It's sad. As a British person, I'm very heartbroken, but it is what it is. And the only way we can continue and for us to stay connected is for you to subscribe on retortmedia.com/support. Please do that as soon as you possibly can. And I appreciate your support. Now let's get back to the episode. So is that going to be the trigger point? Because until the Iran war, I have to say, those of us who've been predicting the AI bubble and etc., we did not. No, I don't think anyone predicted the Iran war. I mean, this is such
Donald Trump did. He said there won't be one.
Donald Trump.
If he was president, there will not be a war in Iran. So obviously he predicted what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. So because before, like with the AI side of things, like we were saying that, the trigger point would be when the Oracle effectively doesn't get paid for the crazy data centers that OpenAI promised it to pay for using government cash, etc. I mean, Oracle is like, it is a general consensus that Oracle could be the Lehman Brothers of the world of tech, and it could trigger everything. But now that we've got the Iran war, I mean, there's so many trigger points, literally, isn't there? Like, it's like, what do you think is the key trigger point? I mean, is it the Strait of Hormuz?
Fertilizer.
Oh.
Okay. Because that's about 30% of the world's fertilizer comes through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
And our food systems are massively dependent upon fertilizer derived from petroleum. Okay? Most people, again, aren't aware of that. They just eat the food. They don't realize they're eating petrol in a fundamental sense, because the nutrients we provide to plants are now augmented by extracting fertilizer components from oil. And if we didn't have the processes to do that, the hybrid brush process and the other one I've forgotten the names of the other one, but producing both nitrogenous and phosphate-based fertilizers. If we didn't have those, apparently the carrying capacity of the planet, again, I'm going to work from agronomists rather than my own knowledge, but they claim the carrying capacity of the planet would be between 1 and 2 billion people. Now, we produce 30%, we waste 30% of the food we produce, roughly speaking. Okay. So we've got a bit of a buffer in that sense, that if we do have to survive with 30% less food, which would be a simplistic way of thinking about the impact of losing 30% of fertilizer supplies. So at the simplistic level, that means a 30% fall in food output. Maybe we can absorb it by handling the waste better, but more likely we won't. You saw how badly our politicians handled COVID, for example. The thought that they can handle something sensibly is, I'm sorry, I'm not stupid enough to accept that. So, but what it means is we're likely to see famines starting to appear all over the planet, in places where there isn't sufficient fertilizer right now, where the output can fall dramatically if the fertilizer doesn't arrive in time, and we're on the verge of seeing that across the whole globe. God knows which you won't know until it hits as to which countries can produce less food now. But you mentioned the UK, for example. Apparently, most of the farmers have finished bringing in their harvest in July. Well, they normally don't finish the harvest till August because it's so dry. They're catching it right now. That means you've got stock of food to get you through this particular season. Perhaps, but when the food starts running out, then there is no replacement for it. And I think a lot of countries are going to find themselves facing a famine effect, including countries that never thought that would happen to them. So we're going to need food rationing at some point to survive what this means. And it won't just be third world countries that face that fate. It'll be potentially some developed countries as well.
Wow. Which kind of, that was part of the answer, I guess, to the key question that I wanted to ask. Like, this was all sort of warm up to my key question, because the point that I've been thinking a lot about is the world after the bubble explosion. What sort of world will be left behind once the AI bubble blows up and the libertarian bubble blows up? Of course, they're all now one big ass bubble. I mean, what sort of world will be left behind from that bubble? You alluded to one thing. Is that really the key thing? I mean, are we going to see any other, I don't know. I mean, my concern that there will be revolutions, people with pitchforks in the streets.
Well, I think it's a possibility. Certainly in countries where you're already living close to the edge anyway. That was the beginning of the Arab Spring, for example. I think it began in Morocco or Tunisia. Okay, where it was set off by a merchant setting himself on fire, absolute despair, and then bang, and that led to the Arab Spring. And that was through a shortage of food. That was a major issue there. If we find shortage of food hitting Western countries, they won't know that they should riot. At least countries like Morocco and countries which are closer to the edge, you're more likely to know you've got to get out there and protest to get things done sometimes. But I think, we are going to face those sorts of revolts. We're going to have, we're going to need government spending to paper over the damage that this system is doing when the slump occurs. But of course, the government now papers over far less than it used to do. The government spending on welfare and everything else has been cut back because of the crazy focus on austerity. So I do expect a slump, and I expect if this war is going to continue until such time as Donald Trump is removed from office, I think that's pretty much a given. So the damage is going to go on not just for 6 months, but for years. Okay, and in that situation, that reduces our productive capacity dramatically. Because it's like the key, there are many key commodities that pass through the Strait of Hormuz, but the major ones obviously are oil and natural gas. Okay, but that's about 10% of the world's energy supply or oil supply. You then have fertilizer, about 30% of fertilizer, helium, about 30% of helium, which is vital for a whole range of manufacturing processes and medical processes. Sulfuric acid, which is a byproduct getting natural gas. You get natural gas comes with hydrogen sulfide or sulfur dioxide as part of it, so you've got to remove that. That gives you sulfuric acid. And then lubrication oils, which again, because of the nature of the oil in the Middle East, that's used to produce more of the world's lubricating oil than heavy oil like Venezuela or very light oil like America's fracking oil. So that means suddenly we might lose 50% of the world lubricant oils, and that means that if you don't have lubrication, the machines can't turn.
Wow. So
consequently, the capacity to produce goods and services could fall by something of that region, anywhere from a 10% to a 20%, 30% fall in capacity to produce goods and services. So that means less physical availability, which will be itself damaging. But equally, there's an enormous amount of corporate debt in the world. People normally aren't aware of how much government debt is being carried, and households as well. Yes. They rely upon income to service that debt. If people get sacked because of the whole experience, the workers can't pay their mortgages, so we get bankruptcies there. And if firms can't get the sulfuric acid to make the copper, they can't sell the copper, they can't make a profit out of that, they will fold. So we're going to get a financial crisis as well, not caused by the financial sector itself this time, but by undermining the productive system that enables you to service the debts you accumulate in the financial system.
Wow. So it's a whole really array of different things. I mean, did that ever happen historically? Was there any?
No, there's no precedent for this. If you can go back to the Middle Ages, okay, you can find things like the Black Death, which wiped out the capacity to produce food, and that's what led to a large wage increase for workers back at the time, of course, because suddenly they had bargaining power. But in terms of during a capitalist period, to have something which destroys physical productive capability while also carrying large amounts of private debt, that hasn't happened before. World War II destroyed large amounts of productive capacity, but it also destroyed the debts. But this time around, we're destroying the productive capacity without reducing the debts at the same time. So that's a brand new combination.
Are there any countries that could potentially escape it? For example, will China be able to escape this or survive?
Yeah, I think China will get through this fairly successfully, because China, for a start, I mean, one thing about China that people in the West don't normally understand is the Chinese learnt in the 19th century you can't trust the West. Okay. And the Opium Wars were fought by the European powers to allow them to continue imposing opium upon China.
Yes.
So that all Chinese students learn about the Opium Wars, and they learn the West is going to rape us if we do give them half a chance. That's part of the Chinese mindset. And what are we doing at the moment? Reinforcing that by showing how the West is treating Iran. Yeah. So consequently, I think China is on a mission to become self-sufficient. I think that's a major part of what they're doing. So with that situation, they've got more of a capacity to cope with downturns than the West has. They're more likely to maintain income for people by income support schemes. Okay, and they are going to have the capacity to produce most of what they need domestically. So they're not going to be reliant upon imports to the same extent the West is. So all these things mean China is more likely to survive. And I certainly wouldn't back America to survive this crisis well.
I mean, what about countries like the Nordics that are much more, I mean, I wouldn't say they're socialist, obviously, but they have that they've always had that really nice balance, sort of socialist policies. The social democratic policies. Would they survive something like that?
Well, it depends upon food production as well. And one thing the Nordics have got going against them is latitude. Indeed, so yes. Norway, for example, has to import most of its food. So Norway's they've got a huge financial buffer with their oil funds, and they've got they've done brilliant work for fixing up the infrastructure of Norway from what it was like in the 1940s to what it is now. But they're still relied upon food imports. They can't get away from that. So the Nordic countries have got the right system, and they're in the wrong part of the world.
Yeah. Oh dear me. I mean, because economists like yourselves, like you predicted the financial crash of 2008. And I'm just wondering, have you had any response from politicians Because obviously, I know you've been screaming and shouting at this for a long time.
None. Okay, I've had some. There've been some, occasional contacts from politicians, but most politicians have been trained in economics. Either they do a PPE degree, so they do 1 year of economics and think they know the economy. Otherwise, 1 year of bullshit economics, so they don't really even know they're being bullshitted in that period of time. Journalists, so they all ignore the people who aren't part of the Overton window of normal conversations. That includes me and Richard. So we don't ever get to talk to the politicians. I've spoken to some politicians. Jeremy Corbyn, who's on the outer these days. He's been oppressed by the British system all the way through. George Galloway, to some extent, had some very mild Twitter conversation with Zach Polanski, but the mainstream, forget it. Okay. And I've spoken to politicians. I've spoken in the UK, the UK Parliament. I've spoken 2 or 3 times there. I get a bit of an audience. There's no follow through. So they stick with what they're conventionally told, and rebels like myself we certainly don't get a follow through. You might get an initial hearing. We don't get a follow through, and nothing changes.
Despite the fact you've been vindicated multiple times.
They'll use something against me, like the house prices in Australia, for example. Yeah? And they'll say, you got that wrong. How can you trust them in anything else? In fact, I got the cause right, which was what causes rising house prices is accelerating mortgage debt. And it's actually stronger for Australia than it is for the rest of the world. But you can have a bubble going on because the government continues pumping up house prices because that gets them votes. All this, there's an enormous amount of self-interest in the political system mediated through conventional economic thinking. And therefore, people like myself will come along and say we should be doing this in the public interest, and what you're taught as an economist is wrong. We don't even get listened to.
And the thing is, looking at, of course, yourself, Richard, I mentioned Gary Stevenson, but there are quite a few others as well. The public following is pretty large. So a lot of people resonate with what you're saying. And it's not an ideological thing. It just makes sense because I guess, I don't know, I speak for myself at least. I can see what's going on with my own eyes. I'm listening to the things that you're saying, things that Richard is saying. And I listen to what the likes of Patrick Minford were saying, right? Yeah. Those who don't know, Patrick Minford was the economist the trusted economist by the Brexiteers, and of course the lettuce queen herself, Liz Truss, that destroyed our economy. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, they said that you, as an expert, you made one mistake. Well, we all make mistakes, but considering, what I'm saying, but considering, their so-called experts, I mentioned Patrick Minford, the mistakes that he made
completely. Yeah.
Okay, so there's got to be some kind of balance. It's just such a stupid.
There isn't.
Childish argument.
I'm using the analogy. You think about economics like it's a science. It's not. It's far closer to a religion. Okay.
Yeah, I was about to say, in science, we look at evidence. We can be delusional, but we still kind of have to have real world evidence.
There's a scientific method that involves experimentation, which actually can contradict the theory, and therefore you learn from the contradictions. Exactly. But in economics, when you have a contradiction in a genuine science, 2 things happen. First of all, once you found the contradiction, it never disappears. Okay? So if you do the Michelson-Morley experiment, you know the speed of light is the same in all directions. Okay. Once that's done, and any student can confirm that result for themselves pretty much, the problem never goes away. So it's like getting a grain of sand inside an oyster. It's going to produce a pearl at some stage. Yes. Okay? And secondly, you have... this comes from the philosophy of science research. So scientists aren't automatically persuaded by an alternative explanation to an anomaly that the main theory doesn't support. Scientists themselves will try to prove the current paradigm no matter what. But the thing is, they can't. Like if you have the paradigm, the Maxwellian paradigm, which is one of the most brilliant endeavors by a scientist in history, Maxwell's equations, tying together electricity and electromagnetism in the way he did. There's absolute genius in that. I know many people who say that if you had to pick the world's leading physicists, it's Newton, Maxwell, and then Einstein. So there's high respect for Maxwell as a scientist. But you could not explain the black body radiation problem with the idea that energy is continuous. So Max Planck solved that problem by unintentionally showing that energy came in discrete packets we now call quanta, photons fundamentally. But he said he never persuaded one of his Maxwellian friends to change over. So his final conclusion was that what you need is a new generation that will accept the new approach to thinking, even though it contradicts with the old paradigm. They're wedded more to observation as a new generation than they are to the current theories, whereas their professors are wedded to the theories and try to make the theory fit the observations, but they'll ultimately fail. So he said, science advances one funeral at a time. Okay? Yeah. Now, with economics, first of all, the problems are transient. So the neoclassical economists can't explain the Great Depression. Okay? Who cares? Nobody's alive that experienced the Great Depression anymore. It's even getting there with the global financial crisis. Neoclassicals can't explain the global financial crisis. Who cares? The current problem is inflation. So the problems get forgotten because a new problem takes its place in the social sciences. Secondly, this vision that economics teaches is very seductive. It basically says, we're going to describe to you a perfect system with no power concentrations, where people get paid what they're worth. It's a meritocratic income distribution system, and where we maximize utility while minimizing the cost of generating that utility. Perfect world, okay? And that can be a seductive vision, even in the middle of the bloody 1930s Great Depression. So we had the Great Depression, which went on for pretty much 10 years, and economic theory during that period came up with the definition they still use today, that economics is the study, the allocation, satisfaction of limited wants by scarce resources which have alternative uses. That was dreamt up in the 1930s when 25% of the workforce was out of a job. Okay. Wow. So the capacity to ignore the real world and just get seduced by the vision means these theories pass through major anomalies like the Great Depression, like the global financial crisis as well, intact, and the professors can find a student that they can appoint to be a new ultimate professor who believes the same religion they do. So you don't get the generational change that causes scientific revolutions in economics that you get in genuine sciences.
Wow. So what would it take to break that cycle? Can anything break the cycle?
I think what's going to break the cycle is they break the system in the first place.
Which is part of the libertarian bubble that will blow up. Like it will have to break the system.
Well, not the libertarian bubble. I mean, the global economy is going to be hit by the damage, first of all, Trump's war, then global warming, and destroying our capacity to produce food. I mean, you just mentioned that what the UK is now drought. Look, it's 70% or more of the country, I think, is in drought. And you're only, halfway through summer. It's going to get worse, and then El Nino's on its way. So you're going to see a dramatic collapse in food production capability in the UK, and that's going to mean rising food prices and potentially food riots at some stage where people look at the bills and realise they can't afford to take food out of Sainsbury's, that sort of thing. So when the system starts to break down, then people are going to say, why is it breaking down? What the hell's gone wrong? So in that situation, you might be able to get alternative voices like mine being listened to. But even so, I think people can go down believing this vision of capitalism as a meritocratic, utility maximizing system because it's so seductive, particularly if you become wealthy in that system. You'll attribute your wealth to your behavior and your individual contributions rather than seeing you're part of a social system. So that's where the theals come from.
But that's actually not true anymore, because I think it was Bank of America recently that came up with a report showing that all of the younger generation who are millionaires, I mean, when I say younger generation, I think I can't remember the exact figure, but it's people in their 40s and younger. So all of the millionaires, like literally, like almost 100%. So we talk about 99.95% of all of the young millionaires around the world are not self-made. It's all inherited wealth. So the idea that now a young person can become a self-made millionaire, it's practically impossible. It's not actually impossible, just for those who might be arguing, but the data shows.
One of my favorite, that's been the inheritance. If you actually were a serious neoclassical economist, you'd be against inheritance.
Yeah.
Because that gives an unfair advantage. One generation gets ahead, then the next generation benefits from getting ahead without actually having done the work in the first instance. So there's a libertarian case against inheritance. Now, of course, would libertarians argue for that? You've got to be joking. Of course they won't.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite cartoons from Punch decades ago, the satirical English magazine, had two obviously very wealthy gentlemen sitting in a gentlemen's club somewhere in armchairs drinking fine wine, and one said to the other, "The secret of my success, Graham, is something my father told me when I was a young man. He said, son, here's $1 million. Don't lose it."
Yeah. And the son will have the audacity to say that, and I've worked very hard for my money, whatever, which is like, actually, that's not true.
Yeah.
I mean, and I always share this with people. I mean, I am very lucky. I mean, but my parents, they made it in life. They were very, very successful and all of that stuff. And I was born into that. So that's why somebody actually challenged me recently on LinkedIn, because I'm very active on LinkedIn. That said, Tim, how come you don't talk about your finances? And so, because I don't want to talk about it. Personally, because I was given the ladder, as it were. I was born into it. So, and I find it so annoying. And I know that I'm not going to be mentioning names, right? But even some of the podcasters, for example, that you've been to recently, like they're going about, I made my own money. I'm like, mate, you literally grew up in one of the wealthiest areas in the UK or in the America. And you go, but I'm still, whatever, an immigrant. Or I'm still, I still started out on my own. I'm like, that's not the point. There's a huge difference between you and the story that I don't know if you saw that bit with Richard Murphy, that I told him the story that it's something that kind of stuck in my head for a long time. Maybe that's how it shaped my general attitude in life. That we were with my family and we were in this really, really nice holiday in Egypt. And for those that don't know, in Cairo, there's a Marriott hotel. It's much more of a luxury hotel that is actually inside the palace of the Ottoman Emperor during the Ottoman Empire within Egypt. So we went there on holiday, right? Very nice luxury, etc. And we were driven out one night, and it was all obviously it's gated or whatever. And as we drove out, I saw a little girl. There were loads of beggars at the time, people in the streets, etc. I mean, it is an African country, unfortunately. That's the kind of thing you see all the time. And I remember I was probably around maybe 7 or 8, something like that at the time. And I saw a girl that was more or less my age, probably sort of 7 or something. Yeah. Again, bare feet, dirty clothes. She was all dirty, etc. And I was sitting at the back with my mum, and I asked her, "How come?" Because the first thought that came to my mind, how come she's there and I'm here? Right? And I asked my mum. I mean, she's no longer with us. Bless her. She was Russian Ukrainian, right? So no fucking around. She didn't say to me, because I asked her, how come I've got all of this and this girl is outside in the streets. She didn't say to me, Tim, because your father and I, we worked really hard and, we earned all of that. No. She said to me, because you're lucky and you better never forget it. Right? And this is the thing that really pisses me off. When I see people in that position, even much better position than me, they say, how could you tax me? I've worked hard for my money and all that shit. And I'm like, mate, you're a lucky son of a bitch, because especially, let's say, for example, because I've seen that the thing that really, I see a lot of women, for example, that make that kind of argument as well. Yeah. And they're like, I grew up as a working class woman in the UK and stuff, which I know it is challenging. But it could have been a woman that was living in Afghanistan under the Taliban. What chances do you have then? You see what I'm saying? And I think this is... Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
As one of Marx's classic statements, men make their own history, but not at times and circumstances of their own choosing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's true. And I think this is the thing that really annoys me, that people kind of, again, they're deluded by this again. And so I guess that kind of leads me all that rant, a bit of a tangent. Like, what the question is like, can this, I did ask this, if this can ever be changed, but it has to change, surely. I mean, do you see that would happen? Could anybody actually change the economic arguments in a way that makes sense?
Well, we've been trying, I've been trying my whole life. And I've got some audience, as you've realized, but nowhere near the corridors of power. And I've got to fight against mainstream economists all the time who think they know better than I do, which is always, I've got to bite my tongue sometimes. I get sick and tired of their ignorance portrayed as wisdom all the time. The trouble is that the economists say what they say not because they're paid to say it, but because what they say supports people who can afford to pay them. Okay? So people like William Nordhaus was not initially paid by Shell and kind of come out and say global warming doesn't matter. But because he said it, he's more likely to get paid by fossil fuel companies than I ever am. Okay? So what you get is being part of this belief system gives you access to the money and power of that belief system. And therefore, the ideas that get supported are the ones that support the existing system, including the libertarian side of thinking about how this society should be structured. And getting through that is extremely hard. I think, again, one of Goebbels' point was lie early and lie often, and the lie becomes truth. Well, the extent to which this misinformation has been pumped out and promoted is so huge that most people, what they think of is the mental picture they've been given rather than the real world in which they actually live.
Yeah. And which kind of brings me to a point I wanted to raise as well, because I wonder, do they actually believe in the bullshit that they're pumping out? Or is it purely because they're being paid by the people that want them to pump out that bullshit? They believe it.
And this is one reason I come up with this all the time. People say economists say what they say because they get paid to say it by the ruling class. And I have had numerous experiences with very poorly paid academics working in universities when I challenge part of the mainstream theory. And it's as if I come up to a Catholic and say the virgin birth is nonsense. And they then, they don't want to hear that the virgin birth didn't happen because that's an essential belief of being a Catholic. And so when I show something wrong about the theory of perfect competition or that their empirical work is wrong, they treat it as an affront, something to be fought off. Now, they are not making a fortune out of it. Most of these will retire on state pensions if they're lucky. They're not being paid to come up with their belief system, but they're zealots. And this is the reason why economics is so dangerous, because it makes people a zealot for the vision they have of how capitalism functions rather than how capitalism actually functions. So they become like, Jehovah's Witnesses, Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, I know one Jehovah's Witness who ended up becoming a wild person because when he knocked on a door, the woman who opened the door didn't let him leave. Okay, so his politics changed fairly radically as a result of that. But the thing is, the ones who go through and believe this stuff, they're not making money out of it. It's what they believe. And there's a point. I opened my new book. I'm writing a book called How Economists Will Destroy Capitalism. That's the main thing I want to get finished right now. And I explained the global warming issue, but I also explained why economics is so totally delusional. And in writing that book, I start off with an extract from a school class of mine, where I say at one point we're talking about a politician in an open discussion, and all of us, half of us liked the guy, half of us hated him. And somebody said, well, at least he's sincere. And the classmates, okay, we give he's sincere, fair enough. And our teacher said, don't overrate sincerity. The most dangerous person you'll meet in your life is the person sincerely chasing you down the road with an axe, trying to chop your head off. Yeah. And so it's people who are truly dangerous in capitalism aren't people who are paid to say what they say. That's the Upter Sinclair, I think it was Sinclair. It's very hard to get a person to change their mind when they make and come out of what they currently believe. In fact, it's much worse. It's people who sincerely believe something which is false. And so they continue believing it, even if it ends up destroying their own livelihood. And that's the situation with mainstream economics.
And we see that, because I was about to ask you about that, because that's the kind of stuff we see with Brexit. For instance, it's the same idea that people have this kind of weird religious belief in it. It's like, forget rationality, forget science or tech or economy, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's like they're following it regardless. And I don't know if
we don't have so science gives you the alternative.
Yes,
okay? You can actually do an experiment to find whether idea A or idea B works. But you can't do that with something like Brexit. Right? You'll go back and give past explanations for your current situation, which conform to your current ideology. So it's much, much harder to have disconfirming evidence in social sciences than it is in physical sciences.
Which I guess that brings me to Andy Burnham, because effectively He's a great communicator, I think, compared to what we had with Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
Was crazy. But I mean, I see Burnham on social media. He's literally there every day, which is great. I mean, that's the world that we live in today. You've got to be very active. I mean, Trump is on freaking social media every 5 minutes. The guy doesn't sleep, and it works. I mean, that's the whole point. But you know, I mean, there's definitely quite a bit of hope. I mean, I like to listen occasionally to James O'Brien, and he came up with this funny thing that he calls this the Burnham Barometer or something like that. And I think every Monday, I mean, I listened to him just before we recorded. I wanted to hear that barometer, and basically his audience, and he's got a huge audience, like the largest radio show, I think, in Europe or something like that. That, you know, he asked me, to give out of 10, what's their barometer for Burnham in terms of hope and the messaging, positivity, etc. Yeah. And ever since he became prime minister, it's been between 8 and 8.5 out of 10, which is very high for a politician. Yeah. And of course, it's anecdotal. But I'm just wondering, should we be hopeful with somebody like him? Because he is different in a sense, like how he wants to push the message.
He still believes he's got to balance the budget. Okay.
But he seems to want to do it differently. I mean, I know he says that because that's political bullshit, but he seems to try to
It's very hard to come out and say the budget, we shouldn't balance it. We should run a deficit. That's what my position is. The government should run a deficit. It's part of how you create fiat money. Okay? If you don't run a deficit, you don't create fiat money. And therefore, you've been able to basically a credit money system, and credit money has booms and busts. The government money can stabilize systems, and it can pay for physical infrastructure that you would never get paid by private industries, such as national health, railways, transport, education, sewerage, water, etc., all the things we're not maintaining in the UK because we privatised them, and the private system has not done what they thought it hasn't replaced what the government did because it doesn't make money for the private sector to maintain sewage works or to build new dams. Okay? They don't make it even worse. They don't do it. So,
actually made it even worse. You made the services much worse. Privatized.
Yeah. So you know, all this stuff gets in the way of learning from experience. And consequently, you can go on this track and continue believing privatisation is the way to go forward. And from what I can see from Burnham, he's better on that front than bloody Reeves was. Okay, but it's still the overall framing, and escaping that Overton window is extremely difficult when you'll get criticised for everybody by changing your perspective. So breaking out of this is almost impossible. And the reason we broke out of it last time around, courtesy of World War II.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a brilliant paper. I would recommend taking a look at it by a guy with a very weird name, Beardsley. So Berdsley, Rummel, RUML. And now he was the chief executive of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York during World War II. And he wrote a paper after World War II called Taxes for Spending Are Obsolete. Okay. So we realised that it wasn't taxes that paid for World War II, it was government spending paid for World War II, money creation by the government to finance building all the armaments and fighting the Germans and winning the war. And in fact, Germany was doing the same thing. It wasn't militarily successful, but the same idea of government money creation financing the war effort. So he realised that and published a paper in 1946 saying taxes for revenue are obsolete. That's the title of the paper. Now, we've had the last 70, 80 years unlearning that lesson. Okay? So the economists are very good at reimposing their mindset on the rest of us. And that's why I see them as so critical, and that's why I'm fighting them so heavily, because to me, they're the ones who've set us up for the collapse of capitalism, while they're at the same time believing they're making it work better.
Well, it's part of that ideological delusion again, isn't it?
Yeah.
I try to end conversations on positive note where possible.
Yeah.
So that, you know, because we know that the whole thing is going to collapse, etc. And we kind of looked into what the world will look like that's left behind. How do we recover?
Well, you recover from a car accident by not being in a car accident in the first place. Okay. If you're in the car accident, then you've got rehabilitation and rebuilding. And I think we're in for a massive period of that. And the only way to do it is to, again, this is where Gary Stevenson's work is important. You're not going to enable yourself to rebuild if you don't take care of the poorest in your society.
Yeah.
If you let the poorest fall by the wayside, your society will collapse. So I think we're on the brink of that. And we have to make, for example, the peak of we get enough food to live, even if that means we've got to bring in rationing to control food prices, that sort of thing. That's the scale that's necessary. But to get there, we've got to realize we're in an existential crisis. And in that sense, we need a global warming Winston Churchill. Somebody who can look at the threat and say, this is existential, we have to fight it. And we haven't yet got that. I think Zach Polanski is a good step in the right direction. So Zach has got his head screwed on properly about the challenges of global warming and also, to some extent, the reins of government spending. He's better on that front than certainly Burnham is. So there's a possibility there, but it's also fragile. And I think what's going to happen is, just like, World War II was precipitated by first of all, the collapse of Poland, and then the collapse of the Maginot Line, and then Dunkirk. 3 hits like that, and people, holy shit, this is serious. And they were willing to consider all the privations that were imposed in World War II to win World War II. So we need something of that nature. And frankly, I don't think we're going to get that level of change of people's mindsets until lots of white people die from some global catastrophes. And it'll probably take 2 or 3. One event won't be enough. Okay? So once large numbers of white people die in climate disasters, then we'll realize this is an existential threat. We have to mobilize all our resources and take absolutely drastic action to survive. Then people might start accepting it. They won't do it before then.
I know, that's the thing. Unfortunately, we will have to, literally, shit has to hit the fan for people to realize that it has hit the fan, basically.
Well, shit has to hit the person looking at the fan. And that's coming shortly.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And well, we had, I think, almost over 2,000 people died in the UK from the heat waves just this year.
That's nothing. You need 2 million.
And that's what I'm saying.
Start waking up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's nothing but people starting to notice, I think. So I think
at least a bit of awareness is coming through. But when you start realizing there are climate catastrophes all over the planet, and they're affecting food and resources turning up in your local supermarket, both in terms of cost and availability, then people are going to realize, holy shit, there's something wrong here. But of course, we need someone to be able to change the direction of public policy. And there are, a handful of non-orthodox thinkers like myself who might be available to do that, but whether we'll be approached or not, they're more likely to go back to the so-called experts that they currently listen to.
And this is why I push out the message to the listeners that, we need to share these sort of videos. And of course, you've got a whole YouTube channel where you talk about these things in more detail as well. And it's to share that with local politicians and really kind of rant at them. I do that with the politicians that I know. I keep on bombarding them with stuff. They haven't blocked me yet. So that's a good start. So I guess they are somewhat getting whatever I'm sending them. But but this is my message to everybody. Please, subscribe, to our channels where possible and spread the word, because at the end of the day, as we alluded to earlier, Steve, that, if enough people start shouting about this, the politicians will listen, whether they like it or not.
To some extent, we've got to break down the window anyway, and shouting outside a window is a good way to start breaking it.
Indeed. Absolutely. Well, on that note, if people want to find out, I mentioned your YouTube channel, but is there anything else that you're up to these days? Well, apart from the book as well.
The book is the main, so I'm running that for Polity Books. I hope I'll have it finished by the end of this month and published hopefully by the end of the year. As that's with Polity Books, How Economists Will Destroy Capitalism. I have my Substack and Patreon sites, and they're both Prof. Steve Keen with Patreon and Substack. And I give an online course these days, which I've kept doing some drastic reorganization of that because my whole promotion system has just disappeared recently. I've got to rebuild that, but that's an online course which I teach, which is about 1,200 students in it at the moment, and that's growing. And I think if you really want to understand it, then join me in that course. Put up with the marketing at the moment; it's a bit of a nightmare, but I'll be straightening it out in the next 2 months. But yeah, that's the so the YouTube channel, which is Prof. Steve Keen, the same for Substack and Patreon, and then my online course, stevekeen.com.
Cool. And all the links will be in the description as always. But, but the door here, this is the first episode together, but the door is always open to you, Steve.
Yeah,
for us to have more conversations.
Manage another one at some point for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. We're always welcome. Well, thank you so much. And everybody, thanks for listening. And Steve, hopefully we'll see you soon.
Okay, Tim. Have to. Bye-bye. Have a good time. Bye.
Please do me a big favor and make sure that you've subscribed on our YouTube channel and you like this video and you shared it to as many people as you possibly can, to keep them informed and get them out of the clickbait shadows. But we can't do this on our own. We have to do this all together as a growing community that believes in truth. And we want to get rid of these clickbait, rage bait shenanigans that is proliferating the web and poisoning everything that is out there today. Now, if you can't afford it as well, please consider joining us as a paid member on retortmedia.com/support. This supports not just the podcast that we do here, but also the reporting that we do on Retort Media ecosystem, where we try to maximize the reach to as many people as we possibly can through information and real journalism that prioritizes facts over fiction. Now, with that, guys, thank you so much for all of your support. Much love, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.
You are listening to CEO Retort.